Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Judge Deborah Gubin. I'm a retired judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County. And I am also proudly a constituent of State Senator Lakeisha Collins. Senator Collins is a dedicated public servant. She's a Chicago native, mother of three, and former nursing home worker and rank and file member of the SEIU Healthcare Illinois, who served as spokesperson for the Fight for 15 campaign, advocating for healthcare workers. She is a strong advocate for seniors, working class families, youth in care, education, public safety, affordable housing, and mental health. Senator Collins previously represented the 9th House District. Senator Collins has successfully passed several bills, including measures to restore child care, provide free dental care for low-income families and veterans, protect reproductive rights, and reform the Department of Children and Family Services, that's DCFS. She currently serves on the following committees: Appropriation for Education, Appropriations, Health and Human Services, Behavior and Mental Health, Child Welfare, Consumer Protection, Criminal Law, Human Rights. Senator Collins has also held leadership roles, including serving as chair of the Illinois House Black Caucus, and she currently serves as the joint chair of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. Her contributions to the community have earned her I'll say this right. Her contributions to the community have earned her numerous accolades. Senator Collins, thank you for being here to talk about this new law that many of us are interested in and very pleased, actually, that it passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Judge Gubin. It's an honor to be on with you all today, and I'm sorry that I could not make the last meeting with you. But we just ended session, and so I wanted to make sure that this is a priority when I got home. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about Senate Bill 1653, which was an initiative brought to me by another constituent in the district, by Old Town. And so would you like for me to talk about how we came about the legislation and then go into the details of the bill? How would you like me to do that?
Do a short intro as to how it came about, and then go into the details of the bill.
Yes, ma'am. And so I want to say December of the following legislative session, I got a few calls and emails from a constituent with photos of property where these were like, some homes that were up for sale. Some of them were, unoccupied because the families were going out of town. And one of the neighbors, I don't know if he wanted me to say his name, but he really advocated hard because he kept calling law enforcement to come and remove the squatters because he felt that, one, they shouldn't have been on the property. They were criminally trespassing, which they were. They took the locks off of the gates, and there were repairs that need to be done to the back porch. So he also thought about the safety. And the person who was living on the property, criminally living on the property, was posting a lot on social media. So he did a lot of detective work. And because he wasn't getting any help there, he wasn't getting any help from law enforcement, nobody could give him any explanation. And there was nothing really clear in the law. He came up with some language. I talked to our legislative, legal team, and they drafted some legislation tailored to this to clear the blur lines. And that's how we came up with this legislation. There were no opposition because squatters have been a problem for decades. And we kept seeing stories on the news around people losing their property or the property was damaged. They felt hopeless. And so a lot of these calls kept coming in. And when I introduced the legislation, people were just like, we have to pass this bill. So I introduced it, got a co-sponsor from one of the state reps, which is Jaharia Omar Williams, and we were able to pass it bipartisan. And it was the implementation of the bill when it went into effect that became problematic because it's a new law. And so it takes time for the linemen for, Chicago Police Department to really, educate all of our law enforcement on how to remove them from the property. We did come up with an issue because a lot of people were not clear on the trespassing act that we put into the Safety Act. And so because of the misinformation there, they thought that they couldn't remove the squatters. But in the Safety Act, the trespassing clause still says that law enforcement has the right to remove someone, even if, especially if they, show a sign of danger or if they come back to the property, there's still measures there that don't conflict with Senate Bill 1653. So it's still up to law enforcement. But this language in particular removes that red tape and it removes the eviction process. Because if you're a property owner, whether you're out of town, whether you're away for 6 months at a time, someone is living on your property that you worked hard to generate that generational wealth, and having to go through an eviction process as if this person was a tenant is not okay. It could be drawn out for a long period of time, cost a lot of court fees. And so I wanted to make sure that that wasn't another barrier. And now that the law is in place, a lot of more people are educated about it. It removes that burden off of property owners.
All right, let's go back then and through it though as to what now this bill actually does. What is the process if an owner feels that there is a squatter on their property?
Yes. So the owner of the property can now call law enforcement, and they can tell them, hey, I have someone here who should not be on this property. All the owner has to do now is just verify that this person is not supposed to have access to the property. That's by showing a deed to their home. If it's an apartment building or something, they broke in because the tenant wasn't there. Of course, they left town or whatever the case may be, and there was no real security on the doors. They can show the lease. They can show, rent receipts. They can show the application. And if that person cannot prove that they live there, of course, the police can now remove them off the property. And in the past, they wasn't able to do that. If a person said, no, I belong here, and they show false documentation, they would tell them, oh, that's civil, you got to take them to court. They don't have to do that anymore. It removes that red tape. And, it just makes it easier for law enforcement to remove them. It unties the sheriff's hand and gives it directly to CPD.
Can I ask you another question based on that? What happens if the squatter shows a purported lease from somebody that the owner shows is not the owner of the property or the prior tenant, so it's not a valid sublease? What happens then?
So that's where I think it gets more into the weeds of it. The owner would have, so for an example, because I did have a situation like this where someone was kind of in the mix. We all know that if the owner is aware that someone is living in a property or a subcontract, the owner will have a copy of that. They will have all their documentation. They would have ran a background check. And 9 out of 10, they wouldn't have that information. So that person would still be criminally trespassing because they are on the property without permission from the property owner. They don't have a contract with the property owner. They don't have a subcontract to prove signature of the property owner either. So they would be considered as criminally trespassing.
Okay. So what happened? Have the police, is this predominantly going on in the Chicago area, or is it pretty much a statewide issue? I know it also occurs in the suburbs.
Yes, it's a statewide issue. It is.
Okay.
And it's
And
actually an issue across the country. And so, we took the step here to take it from, so let me back up. There's an organized ring of these squatters, and this has happened across the country, and this has happened forever. And there has been this thing called squatters' rights, right? And what we've done here in Illinois is made a clear line that tenants have rights. Tenants pay their rent. Sometimes they fall behind, but there are other mechanisms in place to help them either catch up or settle that dispute in court. Someone who has criminally trespassed, meaning that they took a sign down, they broke a lock, they changed the lock, or they went on someone's property, whether it's in their car or took possession of their car, whatever have you, they have no right to be there. So it would be considered as a criminal trespass. And therefore, they need to be removed. That's even if you're on a farm, if you own farmland or something, right? It's considered for that as well. Someone has taken over someone's farm. The family is gone. Somebody see like, oh, you know, I could go in here. I've been scouting out this farmland for a while, this house that's here. So I'm just going to move myself in. Well, you're not supposed to be there. They can remove you from any property that does not belong to you.
Okay.
And I seen a
Now,
question somewhere.
yes, a question is what about somebody comes in initially, a guest, and then won't leave? Or because they were initially invited in, does that make it need to go to the eviction court?
No, they would not. Now that I think it would depend. And that is not addressed in this bill. So I have seen cases where people would have to take someone to court if you're in like a relationship, but if that's someone who's not on your lease, you could still have them removed from your property. So if it's a guest in your home that you're allowed to stay there, let's just say up to 3 months, you all had a verbal agreement that they're paying a certain amount of the rent or a certain amount of the electricity, but they're not on your lease or anything of that matter, and you're asking them to move from your property, they have not moved, you can ask them to be removed. Now, if you made a lease with them and they're on there, that's something different. These are people who don't belong on the property.
Okay, so this would be possibly under A5 of the bill, where it says, wait a second, I read the wrong number. Number 4, rather, when any lessee of the lands or tenements or any person holding under such lease holds possession without right after the termination of the lease or tenancy by its own limitation, conditions or terms, or by notice to quit or otherwise. So that would be like the guest who overstays and then they have to leave?
Correct. Because that lease is no longer binding. But you have situations where someone is in a relationship, they've probably paid a portion of something. You probably didn't put them on the lease for whatever reason. You're asking them to leave and they're not leaving.
How does this interact with the previous law where tenants' rights, where people had, if they had a lease and they withhold rent for a reason, such as there's no heat? There are some statutes about that, and they're having an argument with the landlord. Can the landlord say, well, I've terminated this lease, I sent them a notice terminating it, I went them out, and they're saying, we want to stay, but we're holding this money because we gave you notice that you're not providing heat.
So that is the reason why they have tenants' rights. There's clause in there that actually speaks to that language, speaks to that particular situation where a person who is not getting their, getting certain things fixed, which is the responsibility of the landlord, the property owner, and they're not filling their duties, tenants do have right to withhold or make the repairs, but they have to keep track. They have to document receipts to show that they paid for it. So for a prime example, if there's a leak in the ceiling for whatever reason, and they have made numerous calls, they have sent emails, wrote letters, and they still haven't gotten it done, then they can pay for an outside contractor to come in and make the repairs. And once they make the payment, they can then send in the receipt. If you have a landlord or a property owner that, wants to be, a jerk to you or whatnot, then that's something that you can uphold in court, and you can still remain on that property because you had to take the power into your own hands to get it fixed versus the person who owns the property that has the duty to make those repairs.
All
So
right, so
those
that would
protections
be
are
a,
there.
so
A
that
squatter
then
is
would,
not a tenant.
okay, I'm sorry for interrupting. So that would possibly be a situation where the police wouldn't automatically come in and remove them as squatters. You would have to go to court.
Yes, they cannot, and they wouldn't be considered as a squatter. They would be a tenant
Okay.
who withheld their rent due to, negligence on the property owner. So they have a right to go to court and settle that out. But I would advise people to make sure that they have their documentation. But someone who does not belong on a property, and this actually clarifies the language that a squatter is a squatter. They're not a tenant, so they're not covered under the tenants' rights clause.
Okay, so tenants, though, who had a lease, the lease expired, but they've never been told they have to move out, can continue staying there under the provisions of the previous lease, as long as they keep paying the rent and abiding by it. Is that right?
That's a particular situation I've never heard of. Normally, when a lease is done, and I'm pretty sure the landlord would tell them that they would have to leave at a certain date. I think that it becomes an issue if the landlord does not live in the city and they're able to physically, go and check to make sure that the property is clear and things of that nature. Now, some of these cases, to be honest with you, these are property owners who live out of state. They have not checked in on their property for years at a time. They may not have had real security on their property or someone to actually go by and, keep up the maintenance. And for whatever reason, somebody has been scouting out that property for a while. And so they've moved in and stayed there. And sometimes they've been there for a couple of years. That's a little bit different. And that makes it a little bit more complicated. But for this law in particular, that addresses that situation because they should have never been there in the first place. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration came from with property
Okay.
owners. But there is a responsibility of a person who owns the property. If you do not live where your property is, you have to put security up around the place. You have to have some type of arrangement where someone is constantly checking on your property. If you're a real estate agent, you do have an obligation to check in on your property. You have to make sure that those signs are still up, that the locks are still secure, and that no one has moved in. And unfortunately, we have seen cases where negligence on behalf of the real estate agent or the owner has taken place, and these people have set up shop for years at a time. So we
Well,
have
if
been
they,
encouraging a lot of people to make sure they put these safety guards in place so that they don't lose out on, on their property or deal with the damage, because people have been taken advantage of too. They've been paying some of these squatters to leave their property only for them to come back. And so now that this law is in place and they can get charged and, go through those necessary steps, it has brought some relief, but you know, the implementation of the bill is super important, which is why law enforcement plays a critical part in
okay.
this.
So that if somebody, a realtor or whatever, had a lock on it and somebody comes in and breaks the lock, this law would apply.
Correct.
Okay.
And
What about,
it's the time that it takes, it also matters too.
okay.
Excuse
What
me,
about,
Debbie, before you go on, there's a couple of questions in chat.
I'm going to, I was just
Okay.
going to start on those,
Okay, thank
okay?
you.
Does this apply to commercial property?
Yes, it does. Any property, whether it's, commercial, farmland, anywhere that a person is criminally trespassing, where they do not belong, where they have not gotten permission from the owner, is criminally trespassing.
Okay. Is it criminally trespassing? And would it apply then to a parent who wants to remove an adult, mentally ill or addicted child who has likely never paid any rent? Or is that totally a separate issue?
Is the child on the lease would be the question. Because
Okay.
if the child is on the lease, that's a different question. And the police will not remove them because they're legally on the lease. This is someone who has not had permission to be on the property or remain on the property.
Okay. So that if there is somebody, they own the home as opposed to renting it, so there is no lease. So they have an adult child who's living with them who they now want to remove, they've got to go through a different process. Or is that
Yeah,
saying, well,
if they're a threat, now see, this is the other piece, because then you're looking at the trespassing law as it pertains to the Safety Act, right? So if a person is considered to be a threat or harm to you, then the police can remove them. And this is where we had a lot of pushback or misinformation about the law. So it says that they can give them a warning, but they also don't look at the part where it also says that if the person shows a threat to the individual, that they can automatically remove them on their judgment. So if you tell the law enforcement, I am threatened, and it's hard because I'm a mom, that I am threatened by my child, or my child won't move, leave willingly, I would like them to be removed. They're going to ask, are they on your lease? And that's rental. But if it's a mortgage, that's totally different. They should remove them from the property.
okay. And is this one way to possibly get, it's a sad thing to say, to get them potential services for mental health or addiction that maybe they've had trouble getting for the child because
I
there's a
deal with
wait
that
list?
right now. Yeah, I deal with that right now. I'm a very open person. My oldest son is 20 and he is going through a very tough time. And when he has his breakdowns, because he's having some refusal of getting help, he gets to damaging the property. And a lot of the times, and I'm a renter, so, you know, is a situation where law enforcement did not want to remove him, but because there was a situation where I was threatened, they were able to remove him. Now, as far as having, a way of trying to get them services, there are a lot of, organizations out there that can provide that help, but that's where, the laws, it's kind of blurry there because we can't force an adult to get treatment. That's totally their choice. Law enforcement can offer them, but they still have a right to decline. So that's totally different. But they can remove them if they are a threat to you.
Okay.
It's a little bit sensitive topic, but I understand.
It's a hard topic, and this is a hard
It is.
issue because parents sometimes are in the center there, it's their child, and then, there's also the other issues. So this is an interesting way, especially if the child's on a wait list or something, to maybe. There's another issue in that I'm not completely clear on, and maybe I haven't read it enough. And that has to do when it's a condominium. When can the board of managers of an association get involved? That's number
Um,
7.
so I'm not as sharp on that one in particular. I think that your board should get involved, I think, after you take all of the necessary steps. Are you saying, can you can you go deeper into that? Are you saying that once someone who is a part of an association, like a condo association, if they're asking a person to be removed off their property, but they refuse to leave, or if it's a vacant property and they are, telling the police and the police haven't removed them, that meant that the board should get involved? I'm not really clear.
Okay, I guess it's
Because this law will remove them from having to get involved.
okay. Well, if you want an immediate removal, there's a squatter. I'll give you an example that was part of our homeowners association. There was a townhome that was on the market. It was in foreclosure. And all of a sudden, somebody was living there. They had broken in, and it's in a nice neighborhood. Normally, these townhomes rent for $3,500, $4,000 a month. And this was an individual who was working, and they were there, and we weren't seeing anything from the mortgage company of them doing anything. Under this law, because the association then was not getting its monthly payments, and there was also then a safety issue as to a deck that was in common area, could we be the ones calling the police to ask them removed?
Of course, of course. That's one of the reasons why. So the constituent who called me about this actually lived in a homeowners association. And so the property, like I said, it was in Old Town, and this was nice properties, by the way. And the person who was doing it, they locked off the locks, and were able to go in, and were able to go in. It was a state issue, and it was a state law enforcement. Law enforcement.
You're going to need to repeat that because your sound has.
Oh.
Can you try to repeat what you were just saying?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I said, so that was the situation and why the constituent called me, because he lived in a townhome association. And so the person broke into one of their homes, and this was nice property, in Old Town. And they kept calling law enforcement, but law enforcement with the old law couldn't do anything. They kept telling them, you have to go to eviction court. They called the realtor, and the realtor said, well, this is something I got to deal with the bank. I have to do this, I have to do that. And so it was just a drawn out process. And I think he had been going through this for almost a year before he contacted my office. And so when we came up with this language, I told them everything from every email that he sent to the office, the situation at hand, and they tailored it down this way. And so that's how we were able to come up with this language, to just remove all the barriers. They should not have to go to court. So when they call law enforcement should be able to just remove them. And they have done that now, remove people from properties. So yes.
Okay. Another question, which is interesting. Must you call the police to evict the squatter, or may you change the locks when the squatter has left the property? Also, can you cut off utilities that service the property without first going through the police?
So more clarity on that. Are you the owner of the property where you can cut off the lights? You could definitely call the police for them to remove the squatter. But if you're the owner of the property, you can change the locks, and you can put more security up, like as far as a security camera, things of that nature. If you don't own the property, then that's different. If the property is owned by the association, then they can do those things. But if it's yours, you can do whatever you want to do with it.
Okay. Somebody asked another question on they had tenants who were legitimate tenants, and they invited some friends to stay with them. The tenants left and the friends stayed. Could the friends then be removed as squatters?
Correct. They are, because they're on the property without the permission of the owner.
Okay. What happens if the alleged squatter shows a lease that would force the process to go through the eviction process. If it's a forged, if the lease is forged, would that require the homeowner to go through the eviction process to prove that the lease is forged? Or could the homeowner provide some additional evidence to the police that the lease is forged and avoid going to court?
Yeah, I don't know if I was clear earlier, but yes, it definitely does that as well. So a person who forges a lease will have to have the signature of the management or the owner. They can't come up with that, but they can duplicate a fake lease. And so the owner will have to show documentation that they don't, one, know this person, which would be through whatever process that they do when they allow someone to be on their property. And so that's through background checks. You will have that. You will have that person's birthday. You will have their social security number, things of that nature. Whatever your format is, you will have that information only. They wouldn't. So there is a way to prove that. And we actually did that with a person who was dealing with this when the law first became active. And we found out that law enforcement had not had a chance to really, educate all of the linemen on the law, where someone produced a fake lease, but the property owner was able to produce the information to get them removed. And this happened on the South Side, because she was on the news a couple of times. And then come to find out she didn't stay in Illinois. And that's how the person was able to stay there for 7 years. But they were able to remove them once we talked to the district, made it clear about the language and everything, and got them removed off the property. So,
Okay, I've
yes.
got at one point in time, I did sit in what we call eviction court, housing court. And when the sheriff comes in, they get it, they take everything and put it outside. Under this law, when the police come, what is it the police actually do? Do they just physically remove the occupants and allow the owner to change the locks? What happens to their possessions? The sheriff always removes all the possessions. I can't see the Chicago Police Department having to do that. So how does this
No,
work?
they would physically remove them, and then there would be an opportunity for the owner to, of course, be there for them to get all of their things off of the property. Now, where they'll escalate the situation is if the person refuses to move, and that's when they can put them in jail, fine them, things of that nature. And that was another situation that took place not too long ago with a woman who came to her home and found squatters in her house and damaged her property. So the sheriffs, it no longer involves them because the sheriffs are there for evictions. They're not being evicted. They're being removed from property that they're not supposed to be on. So they're going to
Right.
physically
So then
remove
the
the person
question
off of the
has,
property.
so what happens to their property? Can the owner, they remove them, they're squatters, they weren't supposed to come in. The owner physically removes the person. So then does the owner physically, can he,
They can
what
remove
do
their
they,
things
can they
off of the
do?
property as
Can he
well.
just put it outside the way the sheriffs do? Or can he
Yes.
take it to a dump and sell it?
Now that part, I don't know, but they can remove their stuff off of the property. The stuff cannot remain on the property. So that's one piece of it that I'm not clear on. But they can remove their things off the property.
Okay. Ron Friedman has made a comment that in Cook County, or asked, can the police look online at the county clerk recorder of deeds to verify who is the real owner? And then have the real owner present identification. It's if there's a question, if they don't have a copy physically of their deed to show to
I'm
the
sure they're
police.
able to do that. Yes, they would. They have to show proof that they have deed ownership of the property.
Okay. Can squatters be held financially liable for damages they have made to the property or to damages due to neglect?
Now that's the piece there. That's the teeth in the bill that's not there.
Wouldn't you have to file a lawsuit if you're then asking for for something more than just removal?
And that will become more civil. And I think in
Okay,
the old law, because there was no clarity there, and people were getting scammed out of their money just to get them off their property, people lost a lot of money doing that. And that's something that I could revisit.
okay. Now, are squatters under this law automatically charged with criminal trespass, or is it only if they then refuse to leave?
Refuse to move. If they refuse to leave, yes.
So if police show up and say, hey, you got a choice, either get out or we're going to physically take you into jail for trespass. If they leave, then there's no criminal charges?
Correct. If they
Okay,
refuse to leave, then that's when it kicks in.
okay. Has there been an increase in, if you know, of criminal charges, or are people, when they see that they're possibly facing criminal charges, that they're just leaving? Or has there been an increase in the police having to physically charge them?
So I would say the law has been in effect now for not even 7 months. And normally what we would do is wait a year to get the data to kind of see how effective the law is. And so I think once that year mark hit, we'll see if there's been a decrease in squatters. And like I say, every new law, it takes time for it to actually work. But I would tell you that I have not seen as many reports on this since it's went in effect after the first month of January. And I haven't gotten any calls as of late about this. It's not to say that it's not still happening either. And it's not to say that in certain parts of the state that they're not being enforced. So a lot of times we like to, allow it time to actually work and then see and compare from, 25 and 26.
Okay.
So
Have
around
you,
like February of 27, I'll be able to look at the data to see. And if we need to make some tweaks, we can.
okay. Has there been any pushback from people who are saying I was improperly thrown out by the police claiming I was a squatter? Has there been any press on
No,
that?
no, no. No, because if you're a tenant and if you're a tenant or someone who belongs on a property, you have actual proof and documentation that you actually belong there. And the person who owns the property or the person who is renting to you, there is actual proof. There is, and that's why we always tell people, keep your documentation, keep copies of it, right? And a lot of the times, well, when we were doing this bill, and it was actually done with the Homeless Coalition, who helped with some of this language, because that was a concern of mine, is that people will weaponize this language and remove people that they probably just have problems with. And so the Homeless Coalition, organization was actually there to help craft this legislation too. And that's why we said there are tenants who have rights and they follow a certain code, but then there are folks who are literally criminally trespassing, who are squatters, who don't belong there. So there's just certain, and there's a way that you could tell that when documentation is being falsified too. So there's just a number of protections in place to tell the difference between the two.
Okay. Have you had any
Because
calls?
if the owner, oh, I'm sorry, if an owner gets caught, falsifying a situation, there are fines there for that, vice versa. So
Okay,
I
so
haven't had any calls or anything about this.
that's what I wanted to know. Has there been any calls about landlords, owners, property owners abusing this law?
No, no. Mm-mm.
Okay, wait a second. Is it a tenants' rights activists initially were opposed to the bill, fearing it would result in illegal evictions of legitimate tenants? Were you able to get them on board, or are they still objecting?
Yeah, the bill was passed bipartisan and it was neutral. And that's why we were able to get language from a lot of the different organizations to clarify in there. So yes.
All right, so tenants' rights are set, they know that then, that if a tenant is improperly removed, that the tenant then has rights against this individual.
Correct.
Okay.
But
And
that has not been the case at all.
Okay. And you haven't heard anything, or tenants' rights activists haven't come to you and saying, hey, wait a second, this is being, this bill's being abused? You've
So
gotten
I
any
am a
there?
strong house. Yeah, I'm a strong housing advocate. For those who really know my story, I was a homeless youth, so I'm always advocating for housing and safe housing. So a lot of them do know me, which is why I opened up the table for different representatives to be there. And so, like I said, this bill didn't have any opposition. There were actually people who came to the table willingly just to make sure that we were protecting tenants who have rights.
Okay. And so when you were writing the bill, you said you did send it to legal. Do you have, other groups did you talk to, besides mortgage companies and property owners, in writing the bill? Who else had impact?
So when we talk about our legislative aides, these are lawyers who literally take their time to research and craft the legislation. And then when you talk about opposition to the bill, there was no big opposition, because if you have opposition to your bill, it's not going to get heard. Trust me, I got a couple of bills that I'm still waiting to pass. But with this one in particular, we had a few of our we had some bipartisan legislators who were on board with this. That's both Republican and Democrats, because everybody across the state was feeling this pressure and was hearing from their constituents. And then we had the Homeless Coalition, who would have been one of our biggest opponents, because again, when the original bill came out, draft before it actually became a bill, I was contacted by them, and they were basically telling me like, hey, there's just a couple of things in here that we need to tweak, because the way it's written, it could harm a lot of tenants. And so we went back to the drawing board, and that's how we were able to come up with the language that we have today in the bill. Other than that, we didn't have a lot of people coming to oppose the bill, slip no on the bill. And I haven't heard anything from anyone, honestly, since then. I've been getting a lot of good reviews about this legislation. Now, I will say this. There are some things that, I'm hearing from you all. Some of the questions that I'm hearing, as far as like, fees and things like that, or if you have someone who, like my situation with my son, that could be tweaked, but sometimes when we overload a bill, so sometimes we have to do trailer bills or a separate bill to address a particular situation. What we didn't want to do with this squatters law, because it was something new in our state, is overload this bill with a whole bunch of stuff. Because there were other pieces of legislation out there that address squatters that have been out there for a couple of years, but it would have done a lot of damage. And that would have done damage to, tenants. It would have done a lot of damage to even the property owners too. And so I wanted to make sure that I passed something that was not only just meaningful, but that it cut out a lot of the burden from the person who owned the property or the person who had a right to be on the property.
Okay. Now, I know you said that you're waiting at about a year before you're going to get any numbers. Do you have any idea how often this law has been used and enacted for removing of squatters?
I would tell you that as far as I know, when the law first took place, I kept seeing, because one of the reporters from, I think she's ABC7, I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but she was doing a lot of coverage on this. And I was hearing a little bit about it. The one young lady I was telling you about on the South Side. And then there was another couple far south who was just experiencing a lot of damage from their property and just stress from not being able to move these people off their property. I want to say around maybe early February, she did another report on these two individuals, and they were finally happy because they were able to be removed. But like I said, it took time for the law to take place or be implemented because of the education of how to do it with the new law. So other than that, I honestly haven't heard anything negative about it, and I haven't heard any issues. But you never know. Maybe somebody just don't know how to get in touch with me, but I haven't heard anything on it as of late.
Okay. Can the homeowner physically remove the tenant under this law? Or do they have to call the police?
I would tell you that if you attempt to move the person off the property and they do not move, you should be calling the police. I would not tell you to physically try to remove nobody off your property, not in today's climate. But if you ask them to move and they refuse to move, then you should be calling the police.
Okay. And then that goes then in back to the whole thing as to whether or not, just changing the locks yourself.
Yes, you definitely can change the locks yourself. What I would advise, and this was something that, me and my colleague talked about a lot, is that the education piece about how to protect your property, making sure that one, you're checking up on it. If you're not physically able to do that, then maybe getting a loved one or a neighbor, which a lot of these associations, I live in one, we're very close knit, so we look after each other. If you see something strange with a property and you know that the family is not there, or you know that the home is up for sale, or whatever the case may be, you should definitely check it out. If you see someone there that should not be there, then you should be calling the police. But it's up to the owner to make sure that the property is secure.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Anything that I haven't asked and that the senator hasn't covered? That is, this is a unique bill. This is different, and it comes right at a time where last year there was all sorts of press about people taking over mansions in California and having problems getting them removed. And I know that there had been an increase of problems here in the Chicagoland area with property that was up for foreclosure. So if there's anything else that needs to be asked that you don't feel we've covered, now is a good time to do that.
Well,
and
Senator,
Senator,
I would like to ask a question. It's just a joke, but Jonathan, what type of cigar are you smoking? I thought, yeah.
The JFR.
Nice to meet you. But yes, Ms. Gubin, what did you say?
I was going to say that are there any other questions? Senator, do you have anything that you don't think we've talked about in this bill? I mean, this is a different bill here in Illinois that I don't think other states have.
They don't. It's the first of its kind.
Yeah. Debbie, I have a question, and that is, I'm sorry, let me turn my camera. And that is the effective date of the legislation. Does that apply to the date that the squatters started squatting, or the date that the owner realized that they were squatting? So like if someone was there for a year, but the owner didn't know until after the law came into effect, can they still use the law, or do they have to go through the old process?
No, the effective date gave us time for the law to take place. Now, they were supposed to have been educating folks about this law before it went into effect, but it doesn't matter how long they've been squatting there. Once the law go into effect, the law is the law. And a lot of the times when we make laws, depending on the effective date, it's the implementation that kind of falls through. And so that's one of the reasons why we had to meet with law enforcement, the superintendent, and ask them, hey, when are you going to get everybody trained up to know and understand this law? There's a lot of people who are hurting right now. And we didn't want people to take the matters into their own hands. and get harmed. So that was an important piece. But yes, if somebody's on your property and you just found out about it today, you know what I'm saying? It still works. We don't go by the old law no more. This is the new law.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, are there any other questions? Anything else you wish to tell us, Senator?
This is a great call. I thank you all for allowing me the time to address you all about Senate Bill 1653. If any of you ever have any ideas, I tailor a lot of legislation from constituents or just, advocates who, have ideas, because that's all policy is just an idea. But I'm always available. But I love what I do and I love serving you all. So thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to speaking to you all again.
Okay, I have one more question for you that I just thought of based on what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard from the judiciary as to anything as to how they feel it's impacted their work and how things are coming into court or how things are being handled?
No, I have not, because the old law, think about it, a lot of the times when squatters, I guess I would say felt empowered to take over someone else's property, they would have these long drawn out cases. And that's because the system was overwhelmed. And so a person who owned property, they would probably end up in court maybe 6, 8 months, maybe a year, paying a lawyer to defend them to get the rights back to their property. Now, because we cut out the middle person, and just having them removed from the property, you can free up space for our judicial branch to handle more serious cases and deal, have a less lighter load, I would say. So yeah, and it also helps with our sheriffs, because now they don't have to, show up and pretty much evict people who didn't belong there in the first place. So they can handle the real eviction cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to be reaching out to you next February to find out what you say is what the numbers are showing, so that I can then
Yes, ma'am.
report back to everybody here as to the status, because it is a new law and we'll see what's going on with it.
I just have
Any
one.
other
Yes,
questions?
ma'am.
I have one other question just in response to what Senator Collins just said. So it's not the sheriff who does the removal of the squatters. It's the local police departments?
Yes, ma'am. 911.
Okay, thank you.
Because the sheriffs deal with the eviction, not law enforcement, not Chicago police. So that's the difference. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Senator, so much for your time and for your work.
Thank you. And you all have a wonderful day, and I hope you all get some time to relax. I know I'm trying to get charged back up. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone else now needs to fill out the form so we can get our CLE credit.